Crimea and out of the Russian. We are currently right now at Ukraine and a little bit about a 1569 of the War News stream. And tonight it's all about Russia and Ukraine and a little bit about Iran. But right now, some very big happenings right now out of Crimea.
Hey, look, before we get started, I just want to thank everybody for coming. And thanking everybody for who showed up last night for the show. Um, Prayers out still for my dog to get better. She still has her jaw with wires and stuff in it from the truck hitting her. But anyways, we do have live call-ins tonight, 540-251-7687. Call in, get your voice heard. If you're new to the channel, please drop a follow, drop a subscription, or subscribe. If y'all want to drop a subscription, y'all more than welcome to do that. We are going to be doing new things for our members. That are subscribers. So if y'all are interested in subscribing, please feel free. If not, I'm not asking anybody to throw any money in the channels. But if y'all want to, go right ahead. But anyways, let's get on with the show. Just want to thank Tomcats. I appreciate that. Follow over there on Kick. 8K63 Briz 54. I appreciate that follow also over there on Kick. We are on sorry y'all, let me fix this for y'all. We are on 4 different platforms. We are on YouTube, Rumble, Kick, and Twitch. We are trying to put our main focus on YouTube, Kick, and Rumble, but we are not leaving Twitch out either. We do have drawings coming up here soon, so don't worry on that. We do have quite a show for y'all. We have breaking news coming out all over Russia. We do have some Iran news, but mainly some major news coming out of Russia. You don't want to miss today's show. Please drop a follow, drop a like button, and hit that notify button so you can get notified whenever we come on air. Let's get into the show, y'all. We had Trump coming on the show, or not coming on the show, but we had Trump on his Truth Social saying that Iran was going to get hit hard, and cargo was going to get seized. He was also saying that they was going to blow up major infrastructure. So, and then he came up 5 hours later saying that peace talks are back on and diplomacy is back on. So I'm not for sure about what's going on in Washington right now. As y'all know, I'm not for sure what's going on there, for sure. But I mean, could it be a stall tactic? Could it be or not a stall tactic, but could it be a strategic move so they don't know that we're about to hit or what? I mean, I'm not for sure about what's going on there, but I mean, things are getting really wild over in Washington. But we're gonna see what's going on. They know about what is going on more than we do because I mean they're in the front seat. So I mean, there could be something else behind closed doors that they're not saying or we don't know about. I'm just saying, in general. But anyways, let's get on with the news today, y'all.
and out of the Russian Federation. We are currently seeing that Russia has just deployed military forces to Belarus amid the invasion threat that Zelensky keeps talking about. Also, we are seeing today that Crimea is officially completely isolated after major Ukrainian strikes took out the final bridge connecting Crimea and the Russian occupied territories. And also, the gas shortages are spreading across Russia fast, even hitting Siberia. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours in the news from around the world as we have been able to see major developments inside of Ukraine and the war inside of the Ukrainian state. As of today, the Ukrainian armed forces have officially isolated the Crimean Peninsula in a decisive strike that was conducted near to the area of the Armyansk Gap over the course of the day. Russian Federation armed forces, which were seeing that supplies were dwindling into non-existence within the Crimean Peninsula up until today, were attempting to use the deadly and highly dangerous route from Melitopol to Novikakhovka and south to Armyansk to be able to access the Crimean Peninsula. Overnight, Ukrainian armed forces conducted a decisive strike against the bridge crossing into Armyansk in the Crimean Peninsula and have knocked out this bridge along with the Chandhar Gap Bridge, which has been knocked out several days prior. This is now leading to a complete supply isolation of the Crimean Peninsula and is leaving the Kerch Bridge, which at this moment still appears to be largely completely unused by the Russian armed forces and even civilians for supplies, as the only access between Crimea and the Russian Federation. We've also seen that the Ukrainians join these attacks with several other major ones that were conducted against the two largest cities in the peninsula, with Simferopol losing their CHP power plant within the area last night, and also a fire breaking out within the area of the smaller Strzelecka Bay to the western area of the city of Sevastopol, with major strikes being reported in both large cities. Fuel shortages are also beginning to appear in far larger number and in greater emergencies along the areas of the Russian Federation directly bordering Crimea, with fuel supplies completely unavailable in Novorossiysk and Krasnodar, and this is believed to be spreading throughout the entirety of the region, meaning that Russian supplies might not even be capable of crossing the Kerch Bridge if the Russians ever made the decision to start diverting all and any supplies that are supposed to be going to Crimea over the Kerch Bridge. We've also seen that there were other attacks that were conducted against Krasnodar overnight, which were quite significant in their own right. The carnage along the highway to Melitopol from Mariupol is also increasing, and more drivers that are braving the voyage from Mariupol to Melitopol are continuing to film the absolute destruction and devastation being caused by Ukrainian medium-range drones along the entirety of the M14 highway's length, showing that supply trucks that make it to Melitopol have now made the doomed journey for no reason, as they now cannot get into Crimea because of the bridges being destroyed. Additionally, we've also been able to see that a drone attack appears to have gotten incredibly close to Moscow today, and the Russians have also announced the cancellation of the Max Air Show. The Russian Federation also canceled the Russia Day of celebrations in Red Square and are now going to be holding the event in a much smaller auditorium in Moscow, most likely due to the threat of possible Ukrainian drone attacks. Russians on Telegram and other social media networks, which are largely circumventing the Russian firewalls, are continuing to show absolute enragement over the situation that's been caused in the war and how poorly it's turned out to be happening or undergoing for the Russian Federation. The Russians are also continuing to build bases near to the area of Petrozavodsk, near to the Finnish border, showing that they are continuing to build up force developments and force deployments near the area of Finland. And additionally, more Russian Federation forces were seen entering and deploying into Belarus today, which was publicly explained by the Belarusians and Russians as a continuation of their nuclear preparedness exercises, which are still underway, but some people have stated that this may be a prelude or a preparation for invasions of Ukraine. The Veneer Progress Plant in Cheboksary has also even had more footage put out showing the absolute devastation and damage that's been caused to Cheboksary, the facility. We've even seen that fuel shortages have now reached even as far east as Irkutsk in the far reaches of Siberia. Additionally, Ukrainian armed forces have also been inflicting significant and major losses against the Russian Federation over the course of the day on most major fronts, and we have seen that the Southern Front continues to show that the Russians' attack ferocity is continuing to decrease, showing that the supply situation is already beginning to force the offensives that have been underway against Kharkiv and Mariupol for months on end at this point, if not over a year in some some cases. We've also been able to hear that within the Middle East, things happened today. Apparently, the strikes on Iran were canceled at the request of Pakistan, and now we're hearing that there's a whole bunch of diplomatic developments that have occurred over the course of the day between the United States and Iran, with the president claiming that the war is over. The Iranians have completely denied everything, saying that there is no deal on the table, they haven't agreed to anything, and the war is still on. They also struck a ship within the area of the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States also conducted another strike against a vessel that was attempting to violate the Oman's blockade line that the U.S. has created at the very edge of the Gulf of Oman. But we have a significant amount of news to cover today, especially from Eastern Europe, and we are going to be going through all of this news, starting with our largest stories first, and then making our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. And I have to say, folks,
Also, real quick, before we move on any further, real quick, I'm currently tracking an active attack on Tolyatti, Russia, in the Samara Oblast right now. It looks like the Ukrainians are not giving the Russians a break whatsoever. They're currently actively hitting targets inside of that city right now as we speak, as the stream just went live. And it looks like they've hit maybe a fertilizer plant, an ammonia or nitrate plant, apparently, from the looks of it. So it appears to be they're under some pretty severe bombardment at the same time. If my English will work. But as Enforcer, are you seeing these videos coming out, by the way? I think I've reposted 2 of them.
I am seeing these videos coming out. I'm actually reposting them on the map to get into our drone attack news, which we're actually going to be covering here very soon. It's actually one of the first stories that we're going to be covering. But we can confirm that the city of Tolyatti has come under significant attack, and there has been damage reported within the area of an industrial sector of the city, and it appears that it might have been an ammonia or nitrogen plant that has been hit and largely heavily damaged or destroyed at this point by the attacks that appear to have been conducted by Ukrainian FP-1 drones made by the Firepoint company. But we are going to be making sure to get into that attack and also the other attacks that have been conducted inside of the Russian Federation today and everything else that's happened in Russia actually right at this moment right now. But before we get on into the strikes that are happening in real time along the area of the Volga River, we have been able to hear of something that is even more shocking and more pressing than the drone strikes that we've been able to hear of that are happening right now. Many of y'all will know that the supply situation in Crimea has been growing to absolute desperation. Not only is the supply situation there critical, it's also critical within the Kherson Oblast as well, another far fringe of the Russian front line, these 2 areas being the farthest west that we see any operational Russian forces inside of Ukraine. The fact that they are the farthest west from the Russian Federation's mainland also means that they are the farthest away from the beginning of the supply lines that enter Ukrainian occupied territory, meaning that the travel time for supplies to make it from their basings in Rostov-on-Don all the way down the land bridge and into Kherson or into Crimea is incredibly lengthy, and that also decreases the amount of supplies that can be provided at any given moment, and it also cuts down on the amount of journeys that can be made over that period of time as well, meaning that generally the supply situation in these areas, even in perfect conditions, would be considered somewhat fragile but stable. Ukrainian attacks have started to completely remove that from the equation. Ukrainian medium-range drone attacks on the M14 highway have seen that supply volumes have dropped to the floor in most of Zaporizhia and the entirety of Kherson and Crimea. We've already been able to see that before the major strikes that were conducted against the gaps in northern Crimea, the Chanhar and Armyansk gaps, that the supply situation was dangerously critical in both Kherson and Crimea, with the 337th Regiment of the Russian Federation's Armed Forces, the regiment responsible for holding the Kinburn Spit, already conducting a full withdrawal and abandonment over the past few days of the Kinburn Spit due to no longer having any available supplies. The Crimean situation is even worse from what we understand, and we have seen that the situation is so bad in Crimea that most fuel stations no longer have fuel to be able to provide anyone in Crimea, and we've also seen that this has led to a complete collapse of most supply lines, even those for the civilians, where we're now seeing that a large amount of grocery stores are rationing food purchases to civilians because the supplies are running out, and it doesn't appear that there's going to be any resupplies coming in the future. Of course, this brings us back to the area of the Chanhar and Armyansk Gap, which becomes the breaking news focal point of the night. We were able to see that just yesterday, the Russian Federation was starting to divert all of its traffic from Melitopol, which usually traveled over the Chanhar Bridge into Crimea, through another route, given the fact that the Chanhar Bridge was destroyed last week in last week's war report, and we were able to see that the Russians were no longer able to cross the bridge due to it being unsafe. A pontoon bridge was also laid out beside the original bridge, and that was also destroyed as well. This left the Russians with one option. Instead of driving from Melitopol down the E-105 into Crimea, they had to take the extremely deadly and dangerous drive out of Melitopol down the M14 highway to Novokakhovka, just 7 miles away from the Ukrainian front line, and then take the Ukrainian T-2202 route south to Armyansk and cross the bridge there, finally entering Crimea. That was the only supply line that we've been able to see that was still operational as of today into Crimea via the land bridge, which the Russian Federation seems to be using, considering that it doesn't rely on an incredibly long 50-mile bridge in the middle of open waters that could be hit and destroyed at any moment, and if they did put a lot of cargo capacity on that bridge, it would definitely be hit and blown up by the Ukrainians. Hell or high water, they would do it. So the Russians still prefer to use this land bridge, meaning that this one bridge in Armyansk was the last connection that Crimea had today to the broader Russian supply lines. This one right here. The Ukrainian armed forces have attacked and destroyed this bridge as of today, and this is now also a completely deleted bridge within the area, the last of its type, meaning that the Crimean Peninsula, as of today, is completely cut off from the Russian land bridge supply lines, which have basically been their only lifeline in Crimea to keeping things even in a dangerous situation. Now we're seeing that there is absolutely no supplies flowing into Crimea over the course of this whole day because of the damage to this bridge. And here is actually the clip, the very clip of the Ukrainian armed forces striking and destroying that bridge that we just showed you all in the picture right there, in those satellite pictures right there. Without further ado, here's the clip of the strikes. When you see the first drone hitting onto the side of the bridge, the second drone coming in and hitting directly into the tarmac of the bridge, and also, weirdly enough, we also saw one of these drones attack and destroy a large amount of supply trucks that were sitting and waiting to cross the bridge.
Dang, that was a whole lot sitting there too. And those are the ones that were lucky to actually make it through and actually even get to the bridge through that gauntlet that the Ukrainians have set up with those drone attacks on the M14. That's wild. They're even like waiting at the bridge, and then they didn't make it even after all that trouble.
Man, honestly, it is absolutely unreal. And we can also see here as the drones flying in on the bridge spans, there has been several impacts by the time this drone is hitting, and we can already see that large parts of the bridge have had massive holes punched into them by the explosives, meaning that that span of the bridge is probably not going to be usable. We can also see another hit here as well, and the Ukrainians just seem to be hitting the very same span over and over and over on this bridge to structurally weaken it as much as possible to make sure that it cannot handle hardly any tonnage, especially commercial truck tonnage, over the area of the bridge. Once again, that's the bridge in which we're speaking of right here, and this was the last road bridge into Crimea that the Russian armed forces were able to use and the Russian civilians were able to use to transport supplies into Crimea via the land bridge. The fact that this bridge has been hit to the point it is certainly knocked out today, and we did get to confirm that the Russian authorities did state that the bridge is quote-unquote temporarily knocked out due to damage by Ukrainian terrorist strikes, we know what's about to be coming next. First, the Russians are going to attempt to lay a pontoon bridge here. That's a guarantee. They're probably going to be doing that right now while we're live on air. The Ukrainians are going to come back around and they are going to blow that one up. They did that at the Chanhar Gap, and the Ukrainians blew up the pontoon bridge that was laid right next to the original bridge, meaning that there is still no viable or usable access into Crimea via the Chanhar Strait, or the Chanhar Gap, as we call it here on air. There's also going to be...
And also, by the way, speaking of those pontoon bridges, Russia really doesn't have a whole bunch of those anyway, do they? Like, those are kind of a little bit rare, or they're not exactly plentiful, I guess you could say. I think that's why we saw the other day, they were trying to make a makeshift, like, pontoon temporary bridge, and it looked like it was homemade. Is that right? How many of those do they even have?
They don't have a lot of them. There's actually a fairly limited supply of pontoon bridges because they're considered to be specialized equipment, and so there's never really a lot of purchase orders put out for them, because in most Russian doctrine, the chances of them ever needing a pontoon bridge is pretty slim, so they just don't have a whole lot of them available, and a load of them have been destroyed through the war in Ukraine, so they don't have a lot. If they do pull out a legitimate pontoon bridge, it might be one of the few that they have left. They probably have maybe a few dozen of them left in the whole of the Russian Federation, maybe something around 20 or so, but not a whole lot of them in reality. So they might try and make a makeshift pontoon bridge, but that will probably have a very limited gross weight that can be transported across it, which probably wouldn't be enough for semi-trucks that are loaded with cargo, or they would have to whip out one of the actual proper pontoon bridges and see that it's going to be destroyed. So I would have to say, in my honest 2 cents, I think it's pretty much done and over with. I think that they're cooked for the larger part in this area. And I don't think we'll be seeing them laying any kind of a pontoon bridge. And if they do, it's going to get destroyed pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's going to be much easier to take out a temporary structure than it is to take out the original bridge in the first place, because I don't know how many drones in total the Ukrainians had to use to actually weaken that bridge enough to destroy it. But as you could see in the video, it was several, possibly in the dozens, that were used to hit that bridge, which weakened the concrete enough to make it actually get destroyed. So when the pontoon's brought in, or some type of temporary like structure they try to makeshift out of wood or whatever they try to do in the future, that's going to be a lot easier to take out. So obviously, it's going to burn probably. And who knows what else, but they'll probably be able to take those out pretty easy right there.
I have a feeling they'll definitely be taking them out pretty easy for the larger part. I think that's a guarantee at this point, at least for this area. So from what we know, this is now completely cutting off the entirety of Crimea from supplies, at least the supply lines.
Real quick, before you move on, though, I'm seeing one person, two people in the chat say this. They're claiming that there's no water in the canal, or the canal is dry. So, can we see? Is there any updated? How recent is this satellite image we're looking at right here?
I don't really know how recent, but they are correct. It is dry. I just didn't think that was important to mention because regardless, it's not really like a semi-truck can drive down into a giant ditch and then drive up the other side. So I was like, that's not really important because basically it's an impassable location. It requires a bridge to cross it. So I didn't think that was that important. But this satellite picture over here actually shows the canal as it exists today, which is completely dry because the pumps up at Novikakovka were destroyed by the Ukrainians a good while ago. Here's actually the feed access through here, and I believe that the Ukrainians were able to destroy these water pumps a while ago, and also due to the emptying of the Novikakovka reservoir, there's literally no water to pass over the feed pumps and down the canal into Crimea, so this has been dry for years at this point because of the Russians blowing up the Novikakovka dam. But the
show the area of the canal that you say is dry. Like, which area is it that you're saying is dry right here that we're looking at?
It's the whole thing. Like, the whole thing's dry.
Okay. Well, yeah, I would imagine, though, sadly, we don't have really a elevation map to look at right now on this, but there's still a dip going down into the canal. So, I mean, like Andrew's saying, if you try to drive a semi-truck over that, it's going to get stuck, and I would imagine that even if it's dry, that soil or that topsoil that's in that canal is probably not able to be driven over by a very heavy vehicle like that. That's probably why the Russians were, like, logically still using that bridge that the Ukrainians just destroyed. So they may try to put some, like, maybe some plywood or something over it, I guess, maybe, to try to make it more drivable, but the Ukrainians can even take that out as well if they did something like that. So it's all able to be destroyed even if the Russians come up with a solution like that.
Actually, I see a lot of people saying this is a good point. Some people are saying, well, what the hell's the point of a pontoon bridge over a dry canal? And, honestly, folks, I never really thought about that while I was saying that, so I'm going to have to change the statement. The Russians could try and bring in special engineering equipment, which actually comes from the very same regiment that the pontoon bridges usually come from, to try and build a earthen berm over the dry canal, and then see about trying to get traffic across it that way. But the special equipment could be targeted pretty irregularly by the Ukrainians because this isn't that far away. I believe medium-range strike drones, which have a range of about 110 miles, from the closest area, which is only 50 miles away, could still continuously strike and destroy any special engineering equipment within the area for the larger part, meaning that an earthen berm, sort of a crossworks, or generally what would be called a fill over the dry canal, would also be a little bit difficult as well, especially if the Ukrainians keep up a continuous campaign of striking and destroying any special equipment vehicles that move into the area to try and start setting up some sort of an earthen berm or a dry bridge over the area of the canal. So that would also generally be difficult as well. I'm sorry about that, folks. I actually didn't think about that at the beginning. Like, I was watching the stuff earlier, and I was like, the canal's dry, and it has been dry for years. But I never thought about that when I was thinking, like, they still have to lay something over it, and I was like, pontoon bridge, and then I completely forgot the thing's dry. But moving us on out of that bit of news right there, and around the area of Armyansk, the supply situation is going to be critical at this point regardless, because either the special equipment that's going to try and create a dry bridge will not be able to set up properly, Or you're going to see that the Russians would try and lay down a pontoon bridge if it had water, and they would also destroy that as well, meaning that both things are within range regardless of what they're trying to do, and the supplies will still be cut off from the Crimean Peninsula. Moving us on down and into Simferopol and Sevastopol, speaking of the attacks that were conducted on that bridge today, the Ukrainians are already trying to run Crimea into the ground with the additional attacks that were conducted today to try and put Crimea in such a bad position that Russian forces will not be able to operate out of the peninsula. Moving us on and into the area of Simferopol and Sevastopol, we're about to be getting into those strikes and covering the kind of damage that we've seen there, which has been quite significant, especially in Simferopol. But before we get to that, a lot of people aren't talking about what's going to be happening to the Russian forces that are now largely stranded in the Crimean Peninsula, except for the one Kerch bridge that crosses back into Russia at the city of Kerch. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that right now, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so now that we've seen the final bridge connecting the Russian forces with Crimea, what do you think Putin will do? So it looks like 44% said Putin will sacrifice the Russian forces in Crimea, while 33% said he'll launch an invasion of Ukraine from Belarus to try to distract Ukraine and also redirect their attention. And 16% said they'll end up withdrawing Russian forces from the Crimean Peninsula. And I would say this, we did see, and we're about to get into in just a second, that Ukraine is launching some pretty overwhelming strikes inside of Crimea as of today. And now that they've taken out the final bridge, now there's no way for the Russian forces to get back into Crimea. So now they're kind of stuck in the occupied Ukrainian territories. And on top of that, all the supplies that need to go to Crimea in the first place now have to cross over the Crimean bridge, which already has a weight restriction on it. And it's very hard to get very heavy trucks across that bridge for several different reasons, including the fact that Ukraine might end up striking it again. And also, there's no Russian ferry boats hardly left. There's only like a couple of them left because Ukraine destroyed all the rest of them. So at this point, it's a really ugly situation. Every single strike from this point forward that Ukraine conducts into that territory, into Crimea, is going to be pretty much screwing the Russians over permanently, because they really can't get equipment in there to fix the problem if something gets damaged, because they can't get the trucks in. And also, not only that, but now the Russian frontline forces, they can't get their supplies because they can't get through the bridges either, because Ukraine's destroyed them all. So I would say this. I would say that I think Putin has really no choice here. He'll have to sacrifice the Russian forces in Crimea, and I think that's what's going to happen. I doubt he's going to withdraw them because that would be too embarrassing to do that. So he'll probably let the people just die in Crimea in the first place. That's probably what he's going to do. So I'm with the 43%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that there's a couple of things that are going to happen. It's kind of a mix of all of them, in a sense, because they're not going to leave all of them there to die. And there's equipment that can easily be relocated. For example, the Russian Air Force's aircraft, if they have any fuel left, they can just refuel them and fly them back into Russia. And it would really be such a strategic loss to just leave them there to rot on the ground and eventually get blown up by Ukraine, that they're really not going to be leaving any critical or expensive components of the Russian Air Force or Navy in the peninsula. And also they'd be bringing back the high-level personnel, such as pilots and so on, back to the Russian Federation as well, to avoid completely losing valuable assets in Crimea by just leaving them there for really no reason. However, most of the normal Russian forces, like the logistics forces in Sevastopol, around the airfields, and other locations, might generally be left behind because it might be too expensive to remove them, or it might become logistically infeasible to try and pick them up and move them out of the peninsula, especially if that decision is made way too late. And it's getting very close to that kind of a decision being made way too late, even at this point right now. I would also say that one thing that is a guarantee, though, is that they're not going to be completely withdrawing everybody from Crimea, because that would leave it strategically open to Ukrainian raids and insertions, and that just can't be allowed. If the Ukrainians wanted to, if the Russians completely abandoned Crimea, which at that point is a giant hanging piece of land off of the southern end of Ukraine, the Ukrainians could just send in endless SSO teams from Odessa by boat right to the shore of Crimea. They get off, ruck it up behind the Russian lines, and they just start conducting sabotage attacks left and right on the Russian logistics forces and the Russian rear lines forces that might be stranded in Kherson and Zaporizhia, which would end up being a death knell.
Just hearing that described, like I already know how bad it is. We've both been analyzing this all day long, but it is. I would not want to be a Russian in Crimea right now. They're literally trapped like fish in a barrel. And unfortunately, at the same time, while the Russian forces are trapped there, also Russian civilians are trapped there, and also, unfortunately, Ukrainian civilians are still trapped there in the occupied territory. So, I mean, it's getting very hot down in Crimea. I will say those. Also, this is a stroke of genius by Ukraine, an absolute stroke of genius, because they're basically taking out a bird with, or actually two birds with one stone, as the saying goes. They're cutting off Crimea from all the supplies and also pretty much isolating Crimea, which is its own objective in itself. And on top of that, they're screwing over the Russian frontline forces where they can't even get stuff to the front to fight Ukraine inside of Ukrainian occupied territory. So they're taking out the bird with, or the two birds with the one stone. It's really honestly something else to see.
It really is something else, honestly. It's absolutely insane when you really start to think about what Crimea is going to be causing. And another thing that's guaranteed, folks, is that coastal defense forces and some limited elements of Russian forces are going to stay in Crimea to conduct coastal patrols and Ukrainian SSO interdictions to try and stop Ukrainian special forces from landing on the peninsula. But the thing about that is, though, is that they're going to be running off of very limited amounts of fuel, meaning that patrols by boats are going to be incredibly lessened along the coastline. There's not going to be as many of them. And if any Ukrainian SSO teams do land on shore and the Russians somehow find out about them, then that might mean that those Russian teams that are in Crimea that are supposed to try and stop them from making it any further behind the lines might not be able to react quick enough, or a large enough amount of them might not be able to arrive to the scene to really stop them or completely destroy them, meaning that the Ukrainians might just be able to call in once they come under fire that they're under fire and they need an exfil, load up on a boat and leave without the Russians really trapping them and wiping them out. So no matter what happens, the Russians' deterrence abilities in Crimea for the landing of Ukrainian SSO teams and raids are largely going to cease to exist probably within the next few weeks, especially considering that now all supplies in Crimea are being consumed from the internal supply pools that they have left in the peninsula, which are already non-existent, meaning that there's not much left until they literally run out of everything for the civilians and the military. So
yeah,
I would,
you don't think at the same time, like I'm not, this would probably be going a little bit too far, by the way, but you know, Ukraine is isolating Crimea so badly, it almost looks like Ukraine is trying to prep Crimea for some sort of offensive action. That's what it almost looks like. I'm not sure if it's intentionally being done that way, so that way they can launch some offensive on Crimea, but I mean, they're isolating it like they're preparing for something like that. Now, granted, there's a couple of problems with that idea. The Ukrainian forces have to have some way to actually get down to Crimea, and the problem is the Russians are blocking their way because they occupy Ukrainian territory between Ukrainian land and Crimea, so they really can't get through right now. But it seems like they're trying to do something in preparation for some type of attacks on Crimea. I think it might be limited to airstrikes for right now, but maybe in the future we might see Ukrainian trying to move on Crimea, maybe.
They might, actually. That's definitely a possibility. One other thing as well is that if they're moving critical components out, like the Russian Air Force and the Russian Navy, another thing that they're going to be moving out is the very sparse but still important air defenses that they have throughout the whole of Crimea. That's going to include the Tor-1s, the Pantsirs, the Tunguskas, and all of the S-300s, S-350s, and S-400s that are in Crimea. They can't leave them there because there's no fuel to be able to even run the generators at this point throughout most of the oblast to be able to keep the command centers, the surface search and target, well, not the surface search, but the air search and acquisition radars running for these air defense batteries, or to even keep the air defense systems running at that point to be able to fire off a missile if they needed to, meaning that they're also all going to be packed up as well and either brought back into Russia or relocated somewhere into the Donbass, possibly, or to Moscow. That's probably where most of these would be going if they withdrew from Ukraine. They mostly would be going straight to Moscow or Valdai, where Putin has a private home. But regardless, though, that also will be leaving the airspaces open in Crimea to even more effective attacks, because even though Russian air defense generally doesn't hit its target, every once in a while they do. And those drones will now not be getting blown up, and that means that the Ukrainians will be able to eke out even more increased efficiency in blowing up and destroying whatever may be left in Crimea that would be of any strategic value or note. And they're already doing that as of today, speaking of which, as much as they can. Moving us on into Simferopol, we have been able to confirm that the Simferopol CHP, which is a large power plant which provides power to the city of Simferopol, has been targeted and appears to have been knocked out by Ukrainian armed forces today. Here's a couple of the clips clips that we have showing the fire on the thermal power station right here. Here's another one. This one's showing the fire from a distance. And here's a picture here also showing the fire from another angle. We also were able to see more clips of the attacks right here as well. This one's largely a duplicate of the last, but this actually shows where the power plant is. This is the Simferopol thermal power plant. Generally does provide a large amount of power to the entirety of the region, and we understand that it may have been knocked out of operation either temporarily or for an extended duration of time because of the strikes that were conducted over the course of the night. We also got to see this clip as well of some of the few missile air defenses in Crimea going to work trying to shoot down some of the incoming drones, but it clearly looks like they were not successful. We also got this one duplicate clip as well of the Simferopol thermal power plant on fire, and we also got this one as well, a slightly longer clip of more air defense missiles being fired over the city. The strike on the thermal power plant is a significant one, not due to the fact that it's going to be knocking out power for Simferopol, but because of the fact they really can't ship in any replacement parts to try and repair whatever was damaged at the power plant, because most of the access routes into Crimea have been knocked out. So this power plant might be out of operation indefinitely because they can't repair it. Even if the damage is minimal and it's an easy part to replace, they might not be able to get the part in to replace it, meaning that the Simferopol thermal power plant might have had its last day in operation today. We're not entirely sure on that. They might be able to whip out some magic and get something in there to repair it, because it's not the absolute in-game situation for Crimea yet. It's very close to it, but it's not in the midst of what we could describe as near-apocalyptic conditions, so we're still waiting to see if that's going to be happening. Down at Sevastopol, we also were able to hear that there were strikes on the city here as well, and the Ukrainians also published a little bit of footage of them attacking the Sevastopol Bay area. Let's take a little gander. We see them here.
Oh, look, they got the Telegram post pulled up right here in this video. That's pretty interesting.
Man, they got the montage of clips that we're about to show. Hey, they're doing our job for us, man. What the hell? But let me get y'all to where this actually happened. The explosion and fire that they showed a little bit happened in the area of Streletska Bay. It's kind of off in the western area of Sevastopol. It's basically outside of the actual bay area, but it's a little bay of its own. And right here, right around here, you can see some stuff. You can also see some additional Russian facilities as well, some Russian vessels. Generally, I don't know what they hit exactly, but this is where the fire came from, and this is also where the eyewitnesses reported an explosion. But here is what we have right here of the strike in Streletska Bay. Let me turn this up. Actually, that's all the way up. And there's the hit.
Oh, dang, man. What were they using? That sounded like a missile.
They might have been using a missile. I'm not entirely sure. The clip was so vague that we really didn't get a good idea of whatever hit. It was so loud sounding. It definitely sounded like a large explosion. But apparently this happened somewhere around Streletska Bay. And despite all of the research that I tried to do today to figure out what in the world would have been a value or note to hit here, I didn't really find anything. And that's why I was trying to come around at the beginning of this and kind of give it another once over to see what in the world did get hit, like what is of value in this area. But the Ukrainians did blow up something in here, and we probably have a feeling that the Ukrainian Navy or the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense is going to come out with a statement at some point in the future and probably elaborate a little bit further about what exactly they hit and what kind of damage it caused. But moving us on,
where's the headquarters building? You know, the Ukraine hit the headquarters building a short while ago near this area. Like, where's that compared to where the strike just occurred?
So that one would have been somewhere, I think, over in here somewhere, because this is actually the former Black Sea Fleet headquarters. Has been destroyed for years now. You can actually still see that they have done nothing to the building. It's still completely burnt out and destroyed. But I believe the Rotary Aviation headquarters was somewhere down on this street somewhere, on Lemontova Street or somewhere in this area. So this is a pretty good ways away. I think this is like 4 miles to the west or so of those strikes.
Yeah, it's probably like BC guys saying right here in the live chat. He said they hit a military storage area. That's probably what they hit. It seems like they're trying to go after all kinds of different like ammo depots and oil depots and stuff like that. So it's probably something logistics related, I would imagine. That's just my guess.
Well, the thing about that is that there really isn't any Russian storage facilities that I could find, at least in my looking around on satellite, to say that's exactly what they hit. I really didn't see anything. Maybe there's something out here, but it might have been another Russian building or another Russian facility. Wait a minute. Hold up. That's new. You know, man, the way this thing looks, that teardrop shape to the hull, that kind of looks to me like a warship. Now, I didn't notice that earlier. It looked like these were tugs or auxiliaries in this area, but that actually looks to appear to be a Russian warship. Sadly, we don't get street view in this area, but this does appear to be a little Russian naval wharf right here, off on its own, for this one, what appears to be coastal patrol vessel. So they might have actually hit this building right here, or right onto the dock near to this vessel, and tried to destroy that. I felt like that's what it was earlier, but I still didn't ever see the outline of that ship well enough. But now that I'm looking at that up close, that is definitely some form of a smaller corvette or a coastal patrol vessel, most likely. So moving us on out of that seems to be the likely location of what was hit. We're going to be moving on out of Crimea and on into the strikes that have been conducted inside of the Russian Federation over the day, which have been also quite large as well, and are largely a part of the Crimean story at this point, because we're seeing a lot of echoes of the Crimean story throughout the rest of the Russian Federation, and also some of it has a direct effect on being able to even attempt to supply Crimea via the Kerch Bridge. So before we move on into all of that, a lot of people are actually talking about the current poll that we're seeing right now about the Ukrainians' strikes on Crimea overnight, not on the Armyansk Bridge, but on Simferopol and Sevastopol, and what this appears to be in their opinion. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so this was the exact discussion we were just having a second ago about this possibly being preparation by Ukraine for an offensive on Crimea, but I want to get everybody else's opinion on that, by the way, because we put our opinions out there, but let's see what everybody else thought as well. It looks like about 45% of the audience said yes, it seems like Ukraine's planning something big on Crimea, while 40% said no, it's simply weakening the Russian forces, and 9% said they're 50-50 on this one. And like I said before, there's a couple of operational issues. Like, for example, the Ukrainians simply can't get to Crimea physically right now. They can't put soldiers on the ground there. Now, of course, they could try to land the soldiers there, I guess, by the water, but that's really tricky, and I'm not sure if they could really pull that off. So they really need a land connection to it. And right now, there is no land connection as we speak. Now, that might change in the future, because right now we're seeing the Russian front line start to get really, really shaky and collapsing in some places, like the Kinburn Spit. Maybe that's part of the Ukrainians' plan right there, is to push the Russians back so they can open up a land corridor to Crimea, and then they can launch an offensive there once Crimea is properly tenderized, I guess you could say, with the strikes. So, me personally, I think for right now it's simply about weakening the forces, but I'm starting to see a possible window starting to open, maybe in the next 6 months to a year, where Ukraine might launch some operation on Crimea, maybe on the ground if the Russians get pushed back. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that it largely appears to be a part of the sustained campaigns that Ukrainian drone forces have conducted against the whole of Crimea to just try and weaken Russian forces throughout the area, considering that Crimea is more of a support base, in a sense, to Russian operations that are conducted in Kherson and Zaporizhia. Conducting attacks against Crimea actually doesn't do anything to weaken the direct front line for a Ukrainian breakthrough. It more so is conducting attacks against the forces that help to strengthen the front line indirectly through indirect fire support, such as aircraft lobbing bombs onto Ukrainian forces in Zaporizhia, or, for example, the Russian Navy being able to launch cruise missile attacks against Ukraine from the Black Sea, which is conducted in very limited form nowadays. But also, additionally, this allows for the Russians to continue to patrol and operate Crimea as an occupied territory, a legitimate one, where they're able to stop, for the larger part, Ukrainian Special Forces raids and other actions from getting into Crimea, and then using that as an access point to get behind the Russian lines and conduct reconnaissance and surveillance that might not be possible otherwise, even by drone. So I would say that, in my opinion, it seems to be just a furthering weakening campaign. So I would really be more so with 39% in an attempt to try and weaken the frontline forces through lacks of indirect fire support. Once the indirect fire support that Crimea provides, along with the Air Force and Navy, that the Russians operate out of this area, and once that no longer exists, we'll probably see that the front lines in Zaporizhia, which are already incredibly weak, will be weakened to a point of no return. And since the Russians won't be able to throw any emergency air power at the problem to try and, say, slow down a Ukrainian offensive, this will probably make a Ukrainian breakthrough much more easier, and also a lot less messier to conduct, considering that they probably won't be taking a large amount of casualties or losses of vehicles, equipment, and personnel in the process of conducting any sort of a breakthrough attack in Zaporizhia. So I'd actually be with the 39%.
The only way you'll be eating your words is if by some miracle, somehow the Russian front lines just collapse and Ukrainians start mowing them down, like all the way down to Crimea. Now, the odds of that happening are very slim. Like, you'd probably have a better chance of getting struck by lightning, I would imagine, because that would probably be unheard of if the front lines collapse that badly. But we can expect a weakening of the front lines. We're already seeing that right now. That's why they're having to withdraw from the Kinburn Spit and certain other areas as well, because they can't get ammo or food or supplies to the front because Ukraine's hitting all their supply trucks moving over there. So, I wouldn't expect a miracle of that sort, but I wouldn't rule anything out for when it comes to the Russians getting weakened, because right now they're in uncharted territory with how little supply trucks can actually get to the front.
They are in a pretty uncharted territory, but the Ukrainians breaking through and making it to Crimea, generally that's kind of a part of both of our explanation. I don't really think I'd be eating my words. I think at that point it'd be just proven true what both of us are saying in different ways, because for the front lines to break, the supply situation in Zaporizhia specifically would have to be past the point of return, which is already getting to right now. And with the Russians seeing that even indirect fire support is going to be non-existent from Crimea, which is what I'm saying that the purpose of the attacks are for, we're probably going to see that when a breakthrough happens, it's a lot easier for the Ukrainians to conduct it, and they're probably going to be moving a lot faster because there's not going to be an airstrike anywhere in the area to even slow them down, because the air power that came from Crimea prior won't even exist anymore. So I think we're kind of saying the same things, just taking different looks at it. So
it was just a figure of speech, and I wasn't disagreeing. It was a figure of speech.
Oh, well, it sounded to me like you were disagreeing. I was like, I think we're saying the same thing, just in different ways.
No.
I was like, I don't really get it.
I'm just saying the only way you'd be eating your words is if a miracle of like magnificent proportions were to happen. So I'm saying it's unlikely.
Oh, I thought you were saying that. No, I disagree. I was like, I think we're saying the same thing, man. I was like, what do you mean? But anyways, moving us on from that and on over into Krasnodar, we have also been able to see some other interesting developments within this area. Much like we covered yesterday, Krasnodar is already running, the city of Krasnodar is already running into fuel shortages at this moment right now in its surrounding gas stations and also within the city area. This started to give us an idea that the fuel situation in most of that region is generally quite poor and is starting to run incredibly low. We've also been able to see that within the area of Novorossiysk, there is now a fuel shortage appearing here, and it appears that most octanes of fuel are also disappearing from Novorossiysk, which is very important to cover, and we'll get into why here in a minute. But we can see the fuel line at the gas station.
Man, it's no secret why this is happening. Those massive fires behind the mountain finally caught up with them. Apparently, those oil depots getting hit left and right for like several weeks in a row. That's probably what's causing this.
To an extent, it is sort of, but it really is a part of a larger network of problems that the Russians have been having, which many of y'all have heard about on the show for about a year at this point. But there's the gas station finally. There it is. And everybody's still waiting for their gas because it is running out, and most gas stations do not have any fuel. Now, the reason why this is happening in Novorossiysk, just to show you all the second clip here that we have of another gas station in Novorossiysk that's also packed to the brim of people waiting to get fuel. The reason why this is happening is because the Ukrainians have knocked out almost 25 to 30% of all of Russia's oil refineries, and they are dealing with a fuel deficit in the country of about 1 million barrels of usable fuel products a day, which is about 2 million barrels of crude oil that they're suffering as a fuel deficit. To let y'all know the equation here as to why that's different, it takes 2 barrels of crude oil to produce 1 barrel of usable fuel products, such as gasoline, diesel, or anything else, meaning that it takes twice the amount of oil to make one unit of fuel. So the problem here is that the Ukrainians have been destroying, in quite significant numbers, the oil refineries in central Russia over prior months, which has led to the Russians, which are already in a fuel supply situation that's not good, running out of fuel completely. And now we're seeing that physical shortages are appearing across the whole of the country, and it's no longer a work of fiction. The strikes on Grushevaya Balka have a little bit to do with that, but it's more so on the lines of getting fuel to the ships waiting at the port, and that's more so just direct crude oil. So while that does have some impact on the Russian Federation being able to make enough money to import gasoline from a country like Belarus and that have a little bit more out there in the supply chains, it really plays more of an indirect role, considering that it doesn't house direct fuel usable at the pumps. It's more so oil for export. But still, it is showing us that at the moment, the Russian Federation is running into even worse fuel shortages at the gates of Crimea at the Kerch Bridge. And that's what's very important here. With the fuel shortage in both major cities near to the Kerch Bridge of Novorossiysk and Krasnodar, we can easily assume that there is a fuel shortage now throughout this whole southern region of Russia near to Crimea. So, let's now math it out. A semi-truck, a European semi, let's pull this up. European semi-truck range. The range of a European semi-truck is around, let's see here, diesel models can travel 2,000 kilometers on a single tank. So 2,000 kilometers on a single tank. Let me transfer that into miles. So let's see here. 2,000 km to miles. And I want to find that here really quickly. So it's 1,200 miles that they can take on a single tank. So, considering that the whole of the Krasnodar Oblast, we're going to assume that that's the case, is out of fuel, and we're now seeing fuel shortages in the major cities, so that's definitely affecting all of the smaller cities as well. That means that if they're out of diesel, a truck is going to start running on what it has in the tank here. So let's assume that it has a full tank of fuel, and that it's going to be making its way from Rostov down the M4 into Crimea to Sevastopol or Simferopol. So it gets on the highway, it travels down the highway into this area, and let me see here if I can continue that. Oh, it just gave out on me. So let's start that over again. So it makes it into the area, and come on, work with me now. And then we go here, and then we go here, around this area, through here, to Tembriuk. And this is a very rough approximate, folks. I'm just trying to get this for the analytical purposes. So it goes all the way into here to Sevastopol, which is a distance of about 430 miles or so. And if they ever have to stop at any form of traffic anywhere, or they have to stop and idle, that could also start to consume fuel as well. So a round trip by a Russian truck is going to be about 800 to 900 miles. And that's if they were able to fuel up in Rostov-on-Don, which might also be having fuel shortages as well, or it might be decided that they don't want to refuel, and then we would see that they might be running on fumes or completely run out of fuel by the time they make it out of the fuel shortage afflicted area. It's incredibly close, because as far as the tank goes, it's going to take 3/4 of a full tank in a semi-truck to be able to make it into the Krasnodar Oblast, into Crimea, and then back out and back into Rostov-on-Don. So there's not really a huge margin of error there. 400 miles sounds like a decent bit, but what if, for example, there is some sort of a detour on a road, or they have to run the engine while it's idling in a parking lot because they have to sleep the night, and then that somehow consumes additional fuel? They could start to be running dangerously low by the time they start to make it back to the Rostov area, and if the Rostov Oblast starts to run into critical fuel shortages, then the trips to Crimea are quite literally completely impossible. And this is all considering something that I haven't even added in as a factor yet that is an even bigger issue. The Kerch Bridge, as it exists right now, can't even handle a truck in weight, according to the Russian government, a loaded semi-truck, that is. A loaded semi-truck is not allowed to cross over the Crimean Bridge. They only allow at the moment right now civilian cars, and I believe some lighter weight buses, to be able to cross the Kerch Bridge due to some structural deficiencies that it's been having as of late from the damage from prior attacks. And that means that a semi, even if it wanted to enter the Kerch or enter into Crimea, would find that pretty hard damn pressed. So they're driving into an area that's dry of fuel to basically get nowhere. They really can't even get into Crimea in reality.
Yeah, and also, just to go into more detail about the restrictions on the Kerch Bridge is currently enforcing a 1.5-ton weight limit, which basically restricts it to passenger cars, motorcycles, and small minivans. You can bring a commercial vehicle across the Kerch Bridge, but it has to be less than 1.5 tons, which rules out pretty much all of them for the most part. And also, by the way, outside of the weight limit, the Russians don't want any fuel trucks going across that bridge because they're worried that the Ukrainians might send a truck across and then try to explode the truck. That's also what they're worried about. So not only for the weight and also the damage it could cause to the bridge, but also for security reasons, they don't want trucks going across with fuel on it. So it's virtually impossible to get fuel across that bridge completely.
It really is. Also, I just saw someone bring this up, which is an important point. They said that range for a European semi is probably without any trailer or laden with cargo. I bet you it's a lot shorter, and you are very Very smart. Like, I gotta say, very intelligent for pointing that out to the person who did. Who in the world pointed that out? Who said that? I gotta find you because I gotta give you your credit because I just went and pulled that up and you're absolutely right. That was the distance unladen. The distance laden, which I'm about to get into, is 800 miles. So it literally would run out of fuel before it made it back to Rostov, even if it fueled up in Rostov before it left that oblast. So you're actually a very, very insightful sort of a person who put that out there, because you just made me check into that, and it appears that those numbers are pointing out the unladen range of one of those trucks, not the laden one with the trailer. And also, Terry Alila said, that was me, and a big thanks to you for pointing that out, because you had the foresight to think of that. I didn't. I don't think Matthew did either, and you just hit me with that. I was like, oh my God, maybe you're right, and you are. So, like, it does appear they would run out of, like, even if they could cross the Kerch Bridge, they wouldn't have the fuel to make it back. And we already know that that was the case at least earlier, because a lot of people were saying in Crimea that no more trucks are even trying to make it into Crimea because there's no way for them to make it back out because they're going to be running out of fuel even if they tried to use the land bridge to get to Crimea. So a big thanks to you for pointing that one out. That was actually a really good one. Additionally, we've also been able to see that the Afipsky refinery nearby to Krasnodar and Novorossiysk was hit overnight. Here's that clip. Opa.
Caught a little AFib on them, like AFib, that little fifth-year-old tribulation.
Man, man, whenever you tell someone that you would like to go skiing and you got skiing equipment, and then, they go up there to, like, the ski slope, and then they're like, hey, they call you up because you're not there, and they're like, hey, where the hell are you? Yeah, that's called a fibski.
Honestly, it kind of is, really, but it's a tough time in Russia. It's hard to get fuel. It's hard to get refined products of any sort right there. It's wild, though, that the Ukrainians have taken the problem from actually just producing the refined petroleum products. Now they've made the real problem simply transporting it to the areas that need it. So that's really getting to the root of the problem. You can make as much as you want, and that's becoming hard, too, because they're hitting the refineries like we just saw. So they're hitting them in two different prongs, the transport and the manufacturing.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, it's really damned if they do, damned if they don't sort of a situation, because if they try and fix one problem, the other still makes it impossible to carry on normal supply routes and supply operations. We also got to see in Slavyansk na Kubani, the refinery up here was also hit and had some damage inflicted onto it by the Ukrainian drone attacks. That car was going 500 miles an hour, man. Damn, for all that thing.
And it was a Lada, man. They were pushing out Lada to the limit right there. I can't remember how many cylinders Ladas have, but I know they're small little motors, so they were pushing that thing to the max.
Man, bro, you don't even hear that car when it's coming past. You just hear it after it's passed. But that refinery is cooking real splendid, like the second one in this region, mind you all. And we also got to see another duplicate clip of it right there. In Krasnodar, we also were able to report that there was an attack on the city, and this is what we have of that attack.
Oh no! Was that an interceptor?
Yes, that was actually, I think, an S-300.
Yeah, that's scary. If I was a Russian, I'd be scared to death to see the one of those going airborne, because you never can tell when it's going to come for the civilians.
Man, this is like Squid Game levels of Russian roulette. Is it going to blow you up or the incoming drone? You just don't know. And we also are able to see another clip here from this attack right here.
That's right. Go outside as you hear the drones coming in. A great idea. Oh.
That thing revving. Oh!
Whoa.
Да ну нахуй, охуеть!
Oh, this dude's blasted right here. Dude sounds like he's about a gallon into it.
Bruh, dude, bruh, he just saw the gallons of gas get blown up after he drank gallons of gas just earlier on before this clip. Listen to this guy.
Да ну нахуй, охуеть!
That guy's blasted.
I'll tell you, man. Also, while we're watching these strikes right here, I can confirm that the attack that I mentioned at the very beginning of the stream on Toyati, Russia, it has resulted in a very large piece of damage to apparently a huge chemical plant, one of the largest ones in the area. Apparently, it took several major direct hits, and I got the pictures from it. There's some pretty serious damage there at a plant that produces chemicals that is alleged to be involved in military manufacturing.
You know, that's actually a good point that you just brought that up right in time, because I was actually about to get to that one right now, folks, because we're actually moving our way on up the Volga to the Veneer Progress Plant, and two other big pieces of news, the military base near the Finnish border, and also the Russian developments in Belarus, before we get out to everything going on in Siberia, which is just more fuel shortages. So moving us on up and into Tolyatti, north, and further on north up the Volga, we were able to see that while we were going live, and we just got these clips literally when we went live about an hour ago, that there were attacks being conducted on Tolyatti. Let's take a little look. My God. It's an FP1 blend. Battle of Britain sounding looking at. Oh man, like that thing sound
man,
like.
those have some strong motors on them, like really stout sounding motors.
Man, honestly. There it goes, blade. Off we go into the wild blue yonder. Wait, do I hear a second one? Or is that just that one? Might be that one still.
Oh, there's a Russian hanging out of their window right there, filming the thing.
Man, this is like a whole event in Russia, man. This is like a free air show, basically. They gotta whip out the cameras. And there it goes. Be free, my beautiful bird, boy. Oh. Starting to disappear over the horizon a little. On its way to destiny.
Also, by the way, for the people asking this question right here, because I actually looked into it somewhat, some people are saying, how come the Ukrainians don't add a muffler or an exhaust or something, some type of silencer to the motor to make it quieter? The reason why they don't do that is a muffler adds a whole bunch of weight to the drone, and that's going to reduce its range. So they would rather have the noise than reducing the range by a significant amount. That's why they don't add it.
Also, on top of that, folks, it's not like if the Russians knew where it was, they'd hit it anyways. I mean, their accuracy sucks. We've watched so many clips of them missing drones that are going 50 miles an hour at point-blank range. It doesn't even really hurt for them to be loud. It's not like the Russians are going to easily shoot them down anyways. But we also got to see this clip here of the strike in Tolyatti. That classic like, nuclear air raid siren.
Yeah. It's literally the siren right there we use, I think, in our intro or some part of her stuff.
Man, I'm not gonna lie, man. That one going off makes it sound like a nuclear attack is coming in. Man, it's like, dang, man, that sounds so creepy. But the attack on Tolyatti apparently hit some sort of a chemical plant. We believe it produces, I believe it's nitrates or ammonia. We're not entirely sure yet. It is some form of a chemical plant, though, and it has been hit quite heavily. Moving us on out of Tolyatti, though, and on up to Cheboksary, we also got to see a little bit more video of the damage to the Veneer Progress Plant. Let's take a little look.
Holy cow.
Oh my God.
Remember, by the way, I keep saying this, but now seeing it from this angle and seeing how devastating, it literally wiped out the entire section of the building where the missile hit. Just one Flamingo missile with the 1-ton warhead caused that damage right there. Literally took out basically the whole section of the building.
Russians hate him. See how Firepoint destroyed this whole building with one simple trick. Man, unbelievable. And also, I gotta say, those guard towers behind the thing is still odd. I don't get what those are for.
Dang, man, that is wild. That is the same type of damage you'd see if the U.S. launched a Tomahawk at some target in Iran. That's the same level of damage you'd see from a Tomahawk, which shows you. And also, by the way, they must have fixed the accuracy problem with the Flamingo because it looks like it was hitting dead on right in the middle of the building.
Man, honestly, man, it looks like they probably might have, you know, and they're producing it a lot cheaper as well, which I think we really need to pay attention to why that's the case. But outside of that, though, I mean, this is unbelievable damage. Also, you know, Matthew, I think I realized, Matthew, what the guard towers are for around this factory. Back when it was operational, before they blew it up, the managers would actually sit up there in the towers and they'd look down through the roof, like, you know, with their laser vision, at the guys below that were working. And if any of them took a break, like, you know, kind of like an Amazon manager, they go,
Worker 657, you are not being productive. You must return back to work or you will be shot, boy.
bro, they get back to work making like electronic chips and shit.
Yeah, I tell you, I wouldn't want to work anywhere in Russia personally. It seems like it could be a bit of a drag.
Man, honestly, man, I think it would blow a little, especially how this explosion did. Blew the windows out, the drywall, and everything else. I don't think there's anything left in there. I don't even think there's floors on some levels of this building. But moving us on out of that clip of the impact at Cheboksary, we also been able to hear of some other interesting developments within the area of Belarus and the Finnish border. But before we get to those, we do have one poll that's left in the queue right now that we have to get to because we have to get the next poll up and running on the Finnish thing. And then we're going to hop into Siberia for a brief moment to give that poll a moment to gather up some votes, and then we'll talk about it. And then we're going on into Belarus. So a lot of people right now are talking about the fuel shortages that are now occurring around Krasnodar and Novorossiysk, which are at the gates of the Crimean Peninsula. And a lot of people are wondering, is this starting to show that this fuel shortage is expanding so rapidly that it might be out of control and it might lead to a lot of damage to Russia in just more ways than one? And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so now that we're seeing the gas shortages expanding rapidly throughout the Russian mainland, not just Crimea, but this is the mainland of Russia, we're seeing gasoline shortages. What are your thoughts about that? 51% said this will impact both military and civilian, while 39% said this will only cause civil unrest like we've been seeing in Crimea, and 5% said the situation will be fixed very soon. And I believe that it's probably going to be limited to civil unrest. The Russians will almost certainly prioritize gasoline shipments to the military because screw the civilians, the military, and the special operations, all that counts. That's the way that Putin's going to think about the situation. So the Russians will probably have to be a little bit more careful about their gasoline usage in the military, but I think they'll keep that supply going for the most part. Now, actually getting the fuel to the front lines, that's entirely different. That's going to be a lot harder. So they may have the fuel, but it's going to be getting wasted and destroyed after the Ukrainians blow it up on the way to the front lines. So I would say that mainly civilians are going to be the ones paying the price for this. Also, by the way, I find it insane that Siberia, which is out in the middle of nowhere, by the way, is having a gas shortage now. That's insane in its own right, I would say. And the reason why that is because the Ukrainians launched a really long strike all the way up toward Siberia, or at least close by to it, at a refinery that was up there. I can't remember the name of it right off the bat. They did it like a week or two ago, and that's probably why they're having those shortages right now, because they hit the refinery that serves that general area. So I think I'm with the 38%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to be with the 51%. I would have to be. I think this is going to be causing a lot of damage to the military and the civilians inside the Russian Federation, because if the fuel stops like it is right now and there's an absolute shortage of everything, supply lines completely collapse. And I hope that this is a learning lesson for a lot of people who act like gas shortages aren't that big of a deal, because we're already seeing right now that in places like Crimea, which is basically a petri dish for this stuff, that it's already producing very bad results down there, and it's not even at its worst, that fuel is required for the operations of the modern world. I think everybody now can kind of understand why Dick Cheney was like the patron saint of wars for oil, because you start to realize that if oil prices go up, the economy slows down. If oil and fuel completely stop being supplied to the entire nation comes to a stop. There's no food, there's nothing. You just basically sit around and die. And that's what the Russians are about to be getting involved in here soon, because they just didn't want to end the war and leave Ukraine. They could have just ended the whole thing, you know? They could have ended it. They could have just gotten up, they could have walked out. No, they had to wait for the Ukrainians to blow everything up. And so now they're all going to be in for some suffering, I would assume. But it is what it is at this point. The Russian army and the Russian government had an option of packing up and leaving once the war appeared to not be going all too well, and end with a defeat, but not one that was going to be crippling. And now they're going to be ending on a crippling defeat that might even overthrow the Russian government, with the civil unrest that's probably soon to follow as well, considering that's going to be impacting every single level of the Russian society from the top to the very bottom throughout the whole country. But moving us on out of that bit of news and that little bit of poll right there, we also were able to see that up in the area of Petrozavodsk, Svidovsk. There was an interesting development today on satellite photography. Satellite photography has unveiled this construction plot, which is about a square kilometer's worth of ground. And this is the first military base that has been constructed since Soviet times near Petrosadovsk, near to the border with Finland. The base is planned to house between 4,000 and 6,000 military personnel. And this is a very important thing to note. A Russian regiment is about that size in manpower. If anything, this might be able to fit 2 Russian regiments if they're smaller, leaner regiments, like, for example, some form of an armored regiment, although those don't really exist anymore. They can exist on paper. So that is something that is very interesting to us, at least at the moment right now, and it is showing that the Russian Federation's Leningrad military oblast is still continuing to build more bases to house more forces within the area and to continue to put more forced dispositions onto the NATO border with Finland. Since Finland has become a NATO state, we've seen that the Russian Federation has created the Leningrad Military Oblast, a specialized military oblast, and the only one of the Russian Federation that's borders line up with NATO's, to be able to prepare for a hypothetical war with NATO. And we've seen that there's been a decent amount of efforts by the Russians to start further enforcing, or more so deploying, more forces near to the borders with NATO, which are now in Finland and also Sweden as well, which they don't really share a direct border with, but in technical theory, they have to go up against the Swedes now in the Baltic, being a direct NATO member and not a assumed de facto NATO member, although they hadn't officially been one ever since, I think, up until 2023. And now we're having to see that they are increasing their force dispositions within the area. If some of y'all might be noticing, it sounds like I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over. I'm waiting for the poll to show up because there's another big thing.
I was actually not going to run a poll. This one's going to skip it because I'm running a whole bunch of them right now, and I know there's something coming up with Belarus, so I was saving it for that.
Oh, I was waiting for that the whole time. Like, that's why I kept on repeating that whole thing. I was like, when's it showing up? So, but moving us on into Siberia and on into the Irkutsk region, we also were able to see that fuel is running out in the area of Irkutsk, especially the town of Buryatia, where this picture came from. This is near to the area of the, I believe it's Lake Baikal region in Siberia, and we are seeing that fuel shortages are even reaching this area as well, and showing that the fuel shortages are reaching every single corner of the Russian Federation from east to west. And now it's time for us to move on to the beef of the news where the poll comes in. The bowl. We have been able to see that within the area of Belarus and the Belarusian border today, this video came out showing a large number of Russian helicopters flying on into Belarus. Here's the clip. Here we can see an Mi-17 flying on in. Followed by a couple of aircraft that we did not see on screen. At the moment, we do understand that the deployments by the Russian Federation's armed forces appear to be increasing in some volume, but generally a lot of the tremors that were caused by this today were literally just by that one helicopter clip of a Russian helicopter flying from Russia into Belarus. According to statements that came out from the Belarusian and Russian governments, they stated that the second stage of the non-strategic nuclear forces exercise was today, and the Russian presence is there to be a part of this exercise. Some people in Ukraine have stated otherwise, stating that this is actually a military buildup by the Russian Federation under the guise of this exercise to be able to prepare for an eventual invasion on the northern areas of Ukraine by the Russian armed forces. We're not entirely sure if that's really going to be happening. So far, we haven't seen any direct evidence, except for maybe this clip today, that is showing that the Russian Federation might be building up forces in Belarus for such an attempt. Outside of that, we haven't really seen the Belarusians dedicate heavy amounts of equipment and personnel to the border areas to prepare for this defensive, and it largely appears that it might just be Ukrainian intelligence and Ukrainian intelligence alone that gave the Ukrainians the idea that the Russians or the Belarusians might be preparing for some form of a northern offensive against the state of Ukraine. We've also been able to hear additionally in the meantime that around the Moscow area, drones did appear during the recent attacks that were conducted, and like we've seen with the Tolyatti attacks, right now there are Ukrainian drones that have entered Russian airspace and are attempting to target wider areas of the Russian Federation. The Russians have also canceled the MAX air show as well, and we were able to see in a statement that was issued today by the Russian Federation that the MAX 2026 has been canceled, and we've also seen that the Russian Day celebrations were largely cut down and mostly canceled today as well. We're now hearing that the Red Square celebrations for Russia Day are now going to be held in a Musovet Cultural Center and the Prebolzhinskaya Square square. That's very hard to say. And that is also showing us that even more events are still being canceled around Moscow.
I wonder why they're canceling all this stuff, by the way. It sounds to me like Putin might be worried that Zelensky could be angry that he double-crossed Zelensky when Zelensky very graciously agreed not to hit the Victory Day parade inside of Moscow and Red Square. Because remember that, folks, Zelensky, to some people's dismay, agreed not to hit the Victory Day parade in exchange for some type of concession from Russia. I think there was a prisoner exchange that he was trying to set up with that, and then Putin backed out of it right after he got his way with the Red Square not getting hit. Then he backed out of it. So I just have a feeling that Putin knows he double-crossed Zelensky, and he might want to go back and get vengeance for that double-crossing right there. So that's probably why they're bringing stuff inside, I would imagine.
Man, I would bet you that is exactly the reason why they're bringing it inside, because they're scared, Bliet. Also, just in case you all don't know, the Max Air Show is a very big one for the Russian Federation and has been held since 1992 in the area of the Tchaikovsky International Airport. To show you all a neat picture that came out back in the day, I remember when this aircraft was the next big thing from Russia. Oh my God, they surpassed the West, Bliet. It was this stupid thing, the Su-47 Berkut. You can actually see that thing right here. And I remember back in the day, folks, when I was a kid, like every single toy model kit where you had like die-cast model airplanes or something in them, they had that aircraft in them because that was the big thing from Russia. Oh my God, they've just surpassed the West by a gazillion years. They were saying that when I was a kid about that thing, and turns out it went nowhere. Kind of like the Su-57 Felon, which is kind of a funny name to give it because it is criminal how badly built these things are, actually, like when you look at them up close. That was also first unveiled at the Max Air Show as well. The Max Air Show is kind of like the Victory Day parade for Russian aircraft innovations. But still, outside of that, that air show has been completely canceled, which I think is due to fuel concerns. They probably don't have enough fuel to run the air show. They just waste all that fuel running it. And also on top of that, another thing that we have to consider as well is that the Russian Federation is scared that the drones are going to blow up the planes, so they also have to, cancel it for that as well, Bliet. So with that, we are going to be moving on and into our last bit of news in Moscow, just to make sure that this poll can mature the best it can. Because many people in Russia seem to be quite unhappy, at least according to those translated posts that we were able to get today, about what's going on in the war. And here's another statement of Russian salt out of the Russian Federation today. Sevastopol's been under attack for the fourth day in a row, with interruptions for the third year. Belgrade has been under attack for the fourth year without a break, and Orlivka and Donetsk have been under constant terror for 12 years. At the same time, nightclubs and other entertainment establishments are operating in Kyiv, Lviv, and other large enemy cities. The terrorist government is holding meetings. The real estate of Ukrainian billionaires is safe and sound. The bridges across the Dnipro are intact. And we can continue ad infinitum, which is sarcastic. But it does show that a lot of people in Russia are starting to get the point that the Russians are getting screwed left and right by Ukrainian attacks, yet Russian attacks don't really seem to have the kind of impact they're hoping for on Ukraine. Seems like they're on the losing side of the war at this point. And that's leading a lot of people to wonder, what were the Russians doing with that movement into Belarus today? Is this some sort of a last-ditch attempt to turn the war around back into Russia's favor? Or is it something else entirely, something that is truly mundane? And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so we did see the video today showing a large amount of Russian military helicopters flying from the Russian mainland into Belarus, which got a lot of people spooked today because remember that there's Ukrainian intelligence out there indicating that Russia is actively preparing to invade Ukraine from the north, either using Russian forces or Belarusian forces to go and attack Ukraine up toward the Kyiv area. So what is the reason that those helicopters are going in today? Because a lot of people are concerned. 51% said Russia is moving invasion forces in. 23% said it seems ominous, but they're 50-50. And 18% said it seems merely like an exercise that Russia is conducting. And I try to shy away from making very bold predictions for the most part because it's kind of hard to predict anything in war because war is very unpredictable. But I will say this. A lot of people did not believe that Russia was going to invade Ukraine in the first place. Way back when the main invasion started years ago, nobody thought it was going to happen. And Russia did that under the guise of a military exercise. I personally believe that Russia is preparing to actively invade Ukraine from the north. I think they are planning on doing that, and they're also planning on launching attacks from Belarusian territory with drones and probably missiles. That's my guess. I think these helicopters are moving in forces. They're also moving in probably supplies and logistics or whatever they have to spare. They probably move them into Belarus so that in the next couple of months they can get ready to launch their plan to invade Ukraine from the north. I think Zelensky and his intelligence is accurate, and that's one prediction that I'm willing to stand by on that one. I'm with the 51%. I think this is the guise for an upcoming attack. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that there is definitely some credence that the Russians might be building up for an invasion of the northern border of Ukraine, but I would say this was more so a side fact than like the main influx of the operations. Helicopters by the Russian Federation aren't large in number and really can't carry a load of supplies, especially for a large ground force that would be attempting to invade in the tens of thousands in Ukraine. So this might be a periphery element or a highly mobile element of a Russian invasion force, but I have a feeling that we're going to be needing to see a lot more important information like satellite photography showing Russian bases or FOBs that have been set up near to the border areas, and also significant railway movements of supplies into the area as well to be able to build up enough ammunitions for an opening assault across the Ukrainian border. I would say, though, that this definitely doesn't appear to be a part of the nuclear exercises as the Russians and the Belarusians are claiming, because this would be an exceptionally long one if that was the case. I mean, they've claimed that this thing's been going on for weeks, and nuclear weapons exercises don't go on for weeks. They usually go on for like 2 or 3 days and then the end. So this appears to be some sort of a guise to build up forces for a possible invasion of Ukraine, and it looks like Belarus for now hasn't decided to throw in the towel and give up and tell Russia they're not willing to support a Russian invasion from Belarusian territory against Ukraine a second time. If the Ukrainians continue to pressure the Belarusians, we might actually see them make that statement to the Russians that they're not willing to support an invasion from the north through Belarusian territory into Ukraine, but I don't think we're going to be seeing that for some time, I would assume, at this point. So I would be with the 51% as well.
Do you think that maybe all those flights we're seeing that Russia conduct from the North Korean territory, maybe they're bringing in the North Korean troops to do the invasion, maybe from Belarus, possibly? Because everybody's always talking about it. They say, well, the Russians really don't have the troops to spare up in Belarus, to invade Ukraine from the north, because they're throwing all these troops by the tens of thousands every month at the Ukrainians on the main front lines. So that's obviously some massive speculation, by the way. We have no proof to say that's what's actually happening, but just throwing that out there just as an idea. Do you think that could be what they're up to?
That could be. I mean, that really could be a point of what they're doing, is bringing in North Korean personnel and then railroading their equipment in with them across Russia, so that way they can get it all set up. And maybe I don't think they're going to take combatant roles, though. I think that whatever they're using the North Koreans for, it's going to be something in the rear lines for support, like engineering, logistics. Well, engineering's more of a frontline thing in most cases, so probably something logistics related or rear line related. Maybe even like pulling security in occupied Ukrainian territory if they do take ground, so that way they're not on the front lines getting slaughtered in the thousands and really doing no one any good and really doing the Russians a lot more harm than they could ever get a benefit out of. But I bet you that probably might be one of the reasons they're pulling them in is for some rear line work of some sort.
Yeah, if they were doing that, if the Russians were bringing in North Korean soldiers to invade Ukraine from the north from Belarusian territory, I would say at best that would be a distraction or a diversionary effort that Russia would try to conduct on Ukraine, because the North Koreans do not have the expertise, nor do they have the knowledge or the equipment to actually launch a legitimate offensive on Ukraine from that highly protected region near Kyiv like that. They don't have that type of ability. So if they did it, I would say it's probably entirely for diversionary purposes if they were to try that.
Man, I heard that this picture right here, man, was taken when they got access to cell phones and they saw the first guy like pull up like a certain kind of a website. This guy whipped out the binoculars and said, "Oh, what do we have here?" Man, like, everyone else was like, "Oh, man," like, bro, circa 2024, the North Koreans got introduced to the global internet, like a colorized photo. But outside of that, I think that might really be what they're doing. Or they get a little bit more creative. They might be bringing them in to send them down to the Donbass to operate Russian supply lines there, or maybe they're bringing in logistics regiments of the KPA, and they're going to be operating in the Donbass, so that way they can take their supply units, which would probably be of higher quality, shift them into Belarus, so that way they'd be able to get their best troops in on this new offensive where that might be needed up front.
Maybe so. We'll have to see, though. But when the North Koreans get involved, I'm not really expecting anything crazy to happen, except for maybe there might be a skirmish and then it ends in like a week or something like that, because they don't really last that long. So, we'll have to see with that. And obviously, to reiterate this one more time, we don't have any proof that Russia's doing that with the North Koreans. We're just simply sort of spitballing about what Russia could be planning on doing if they launch an offensive from Belarus.
Man, honestly, man, you know what I think it would turn into? It probably turn into Vovchansk. Like, they're going to be there for 2 years and have made it nowhere. The Russians are 2 years into the Vovchansk offensive, and they made it from here at the border, a mile and a half south, and they're at the meatpacking plant on the north side of Vovchansk, and that's where they've made it in 2 years, with I think like 40,000 men as their starting invasion force. So if something happens on the border, like, I wouldn't see the invasion force being any larger than the Vovchansk offensive, which was, I think, 40 to 50,000 men. And so if they push across the border, I think they're probably going to make it to somewhere like Novi Yarlovichi, right here, and then get stuck. I think that's probably what would happen, because they don't really seem to have the ability for years now to be able to maneuver rapidly enough to take advantage of the element of surprise against Ukraine. And usually Ukrainians already have pre-dug in fortifications and defensives to be able to give them a little bit of extra time to slow them down and bring reinforcements into the area when something happens. And Matthew said North Koreans are the meat. The dog meat, I suppose.
No, man, he said they were near the meat packing plant. I was like, well, damn. The front line basically became a meat packing plant for the most part, the way they were getting slaughtered.
Man, I tell you, man, how the Vovchansk offensive went, I'd say the Ukrainians are up there on that north side of the city packing the meat down the Russians' throats, like, with how badly that's
Yikes.
gone. I mean,
bro,
yikes.
I don't know about that. Hey, yo.
Man, that was deliberate, man. Like, man, that was deliberate, man. But they ain't doing them well up there. If you stuck it for 2-something years around a meat packing plant, the jokes write themselves at that point, they ain't having a good time. But anyways, folks, enough of that stuff. Enough of that. It's time for us to move on out of this news of what's been going on inside of Russia in the strikes that Ukraine has conducted today and everything else going on outside of the war. And it's time for us to quickly pop on down into the Middle East and then immediately leave that and come back to Ukraine. But before we get on into that news out of the Middle East, I do want to make sure that we give a huge thanks to everybody who has been here over the course of the night. Tonight, we had a peak viewership tonight of nearly 18,000 people. Holy moly, that's a lot of people. And we also had 89,000 people here on the stream over the course of an hour and 27 minutes. Holy moly, that's a lot of people. And we thank you all so much once again for choosing this channel as your primary source of news each and every single day, and I hope you all been enjoying the news coverage over the course of this day as well. Hopefully the analysis, the coverage, and the developments that we've covered on air have been incredibly good, and I hope that we've done honor by y'all's name. And so, with that, it's time for us to start moving on in the Middle East, but before we do, let's take 3 questions from the chat, and then get on down there into that business that's going on down in the Middle East. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so our first of the 3 super chats before we move on to our Middle East news, which could cause people to maybe have a momentary break of insanity, possibly, but we're not responsible for that. Please consult your doctor before hearing this news. Moving on to our first of the super chats. This one goes to Old Warrior Fellow, who puts in a very generous $50 support. And thank you very much, Old Warrior, for the support day in and day out and helping to keep the channel running with that support and being an old guard of the channel. He said, it's about time when the orders will start being sent out that X is now in a fortified position. No retreat without the permission of the person. Take one from the chat.
Geschliebeleimen any Deutschen beyond that. A huge thing here. I think it might get around to that here in the future from the Russian government. They might actually tell people to fight till the last man, which is a very stupid strategy, by the way. That's the dumbest one you can ever do, folks. Never fight till the last man. It's a dumb idea. If the position just cannot be held, it's best to withdraw them all and let them fight another day than have them die and surrender on one point and lose that whole part of your armed force and then claim that it was some sort of heroic struggle. That's why, honestly, folks, that's why I say, and I say this to this day, the Nazis have this whole thing around them where it's like, they had like super weapons and stuff. The Nazis were stupid as hell. Their technology was trying to eke out way too much from the limited technology they had at the time, their strategies were terrible. They basically relied entirely on the element of surprise, and if they lost that, they went into this grueling, grinding years of attrition and massive losses on their end that they just couldn't sustain. I mean, I'll be honest with y'all, folks. I think that World War II Germany, I just got to say, like, I don't know if this is a hot take or not. I feel like it is the most overhyped, nation or era of a nation that has ever existed. Like, people give the Nazi Germans way too much credit for a lot of stuff that they hardly were able to achieve. And then people be like, but they made rockets. It's like, yeah, we were like making rockets over here, not using them in war like the Germans were, but a lot of the technology they were using, we had something equivalent to that here in the States around that time, or we had something better. I mean, have y'all ever seen a German fly a P-51 Mustang? No? Well, they ain't as good as us. Like, y'all ever see them put 1,000 B-17s over America? No? Well, they ain't as good as us. I hate to say it. But anyways, beyond that, though, a huge thanks to you for the support and helping the channel to keep it running, old warrior fella. And thank you for being an old guard and a channel legend. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it running. And I got to say that it's an absolute honor and a great pleasure to know that so many people like you enjoy this channel and help us to keep this thing running. And we will make sure to get one from the live chat in your honor. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
So the one from the live chat goes to Sean Willem, who said, are there any minor bridge crossings that Russia could use in substitution for the ones that have been hit?
I think there's a little one somewhere, like a little itty bitty one, I believe, but it's not that big, and it like the road might start to get bogged down pretty quickly if they tried to send everyone down. And the few people that survived, by the way, because the Chonhar Bridge has been completely knocked out and there's no way to cross that passageway. And so even if they somehow build an earthen berm over the dry canal, the chances of Russian trucks making it past Novokakhovka is near impossible. I mean, if they make it through, it's still a trickle to the point it's not going to really change anything in Crimea. So really, to be honest, if there is a passageway, it's probably going to be not that usable for heavy volumes of traffic, and there won't even be that amount of traffic to exist in the first place to really even bring that into question. So I would say there might be one that I don't know of off the top of my head, but generally it won't even really matter all too much with how badly things are going elsewhere outside of Crimea right now and just trying to get the trucks to Crimea. So I hope that does address the live chat the best I can, and a big thanks to you once again for support, old warrior fella, at helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Ella MC Wheels NAFO, who puts in a $25 support. And thank you very much, Ella, as well, for that generous support. Hey. And Ella said, cheers, enforcers. 600,000 LSA strong and on the road to a milli. And love the stream, love the news, and love the community. And LLT LSA, love Ukraine, and take one from the chat.
And I gotta say, a huge thanks to you for the support, Ella McWheels NAFO, on the congratulations on 600,000 subscribers. That's crazy, honestly. 600,000 subscribers. It's honestly a number I can't even comprehend anymore. I was on a game a couple of days ago, folks, on Sunday after the whole day of 9 hours of live streams, and I got on this game called Squad, and I got onto a match. And I created a squad because there wasn't any available. And I think it was out of the 9 people in that squad, 5 of them or so watched the show. And I was absolutely blown away that they were all like, oh yeah, I watch the show every day. I was like, oh my God. I was like, we're actually getting well known enough that if I go into a video game now in most public lobbies, where there's a voice chat and I talk, there is going to be someone out of the 60 people on that team that are going to be like, oh my God, you're the enforcer. And it's that is wild. That's really crazy to think about how big the channel's been getting these days. And I got to say, we're very appreciative of it. I don't even know how we're lucky enough to be in the position of running a channel like this and having 600,000 people who subscribe and enjoy the channel, but I got to thank you for being one of those folks and going out of your way to support it so we can keep this thing running, hopefully for years. Maybe we'll end up getting to a couple of million subscribers at some point. You never know. Maybe one day we'll be some of those channels out there that have 11 million or 10 million subscribers, and this might be somehow crazy enough the humble beginnings. Maybe it's an exponential curve thing. But beyond that, though, I got to thank you so much once again for loving the stream, loving the news, and loving the Lee Spring Army, which is the greatest community on the internet, bar none. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are going to take one from the live chat in your honor. So Matthew, what do we got?
We also have here the live chat question from Kathy Robinson, who said, "Is Belarus affected by the Russian gas shortage? And congrats on the 600K." And thank you, by the way, for the congrats. We are very happy to be hitting that 600 number right there, I must say. And we're already on the way to 601 already. But to answer the question, I can actually get you some answers on this one right here because I've been looking at it. Belarus has become the new gas station for the Russians. Generally, the Russians were nicknamed the world's gas station because they exported a lot of fuel. But now they're having a problem with that, which sort of indicates a wide-ranging series of economic issues inside of Russia, and also their gas is now having a problem. But now they're importing a whole bunch of gasoline from Belarus, and that's how they're trying to fix the shortages, at least in the short term, that they're having because of the refineries getting hit left and right by the Ukrainians. So somehow they're getting, I'm not sure if they're trucking the fuel over or they're sending it over with a pipeline or something. I'm not really sure how they're getting it there, but Belarus is actually benefiting. They're making money off the Russians' gas shortage. But Enforcer, what say you?
Yeah, it's actually true. They are making money because Belarus kind of sits in like this weird neutral ground right now between both sides where Ukraine doesn't consider them an active belligerent and Russia doesn't either. Russia can send their crude oil to Belarusian refineries and have it refined into fuel and then have it shipped back across the border into Russia, which isn't really a whole lot. Like, I don't think the refining capacity in Belarus is a great deal. I think it's like, let me go pull it up. Let's see, Russian fuel consumption daily. How many barrels? So they consume 869,000 barrels a day. It's not really a whole lot, actually. So let's see let's see, Russian fuel. Sorry, that's Russia. I forgot to type in Bella before it. Russian fuel consumption. So Belarus actually only consumes 24,000 barrels of oil a day in fuel and whatnot. So the refining capacity can't be much larger than that. The refining capacity is maybe 25 or 26,000 barrels of fuel a day, because that's usually how it works, is that they produce just a little bit of surplus in most countries daily. So they're maybe shipping over like 10,000 barrels of usable fuel in diesel and gasoline every day into Russia. So it's not really doing a whole lot to stop the hemorrhage. If anything, it's like a drop in the bucket, but he is trying to do something about it, and that's why the Belarusians are actually profiting from the situation, is because Russia is sending crude oil to them to refine and then buy back as usable fuel to be shipped back into Russia. So I hope that does explain that the best we can, and also with a little bit of facts and statistics added in as well on Belarusian fuel consumption and production rates. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to be getting on into the rest of the news, bleed.
So our last one here goes to none other than Caitlyn Jenner, last name Tolls, by the way, who puts in the 20. We do appreciate the support. He said, will a deal be done, or will we be transitioning back to war? I see what you did. But he said, so honestly, I think he's referring to the Iran thing, right? That's why you're taking that?
Yeah, I think so.
I got caught off guard by the reference and the analogies there, and that was really something else. But I'll say this: I think that a deal will definitely not be done. We'll get to that here in just a second. I don't think a deal is being done. I think a lot of stuff is being made up right now about how the negotiations are really going at the moment. So I don't think a deal is here. We're still going to be stuck and basically bogged down in the Middle East until the U.S. finally decides to finish the job. That's what's going to be basically happening, in my opinion. But Enforcer, what say you?
There ain't no deal. Someone actually made a count today of how many times the president has said that a deal is just hours away. Y'all want to know the count? Over 60 days of the ceasefire, the president has said that a deal is literally just hours away 38 times. So we're almost averaging a deal is literally hours away every other day of the ceasefire. So honestly, what's crazy, folks, is that there are far less days out of the 60 days. Out of 60 days of ceasefire, there's only been 22 days where he has not said that. Only 22, that's 3 weeks, basically. Out of the other 6 weeks of the 2-month-long ceasefire, he said almost every day that a deal is just hours around the corner. I mean, when you have that kind of a running odds of the deal being around the corner that many times over 2 months and it never is around the corner, high chances at this point that there is no way in hell that there is going to be a deal coming around this time. So, we'll see, but I'm highly doubting that that's going to be the case. We're going to be down there in a forever war now, which I'm pretty sure the current people said they weren't going to get involved in the Middle East, but now it looks like we are. So, we'll be getting on into that literally right now. But a humongous thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like you who help to make this thing possible. And with that, folks, it's time for us to be going on and into the cesspit, the old sandbox, the old stomping grounds, the forever warland. You were born too late to fight in the sandbox. You were born too early to fight in the sandbox, but you were born just in time to fight in the sandbox. And so, let's get into it. I'm just going to breeze over the diplomatic developments today, like as quick as I can. We're just going to get to what actually happened. So, earlier in the morning, the CENTCOM published a statement. CENTCOM's official Twitter, published the statement. The Strait of Hormuz is open for transit. Safe pathways are established for commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The pathways are available to all vessels not violating the blockade against Iran. Hundreds of ships have transited in the last 2 months, and the U.S. forces are postured to defend against Iranian aggression. Iran does not control the Strait of Hormuz. So, now the blockade does not exist, according to CENTCOM. Not long afterwards, we then were able to hear the following. The United States will be hitting Iran, whose Navy, Air Force, radar, anti-aircraft, and all other forms of defense, together with its most offensive capability, are gone very hard tonight. At some point in the not-too-distant future, we'll be taking Karg Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets, much like we have with Venezuela. Venezuela, great place, wonderful oil. Sour oil is what they call it, very sour, which is working out brilliantly for both Venezuela and the United States of America. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Not long afterwards, the oil price then skyrocketed, which we saw right here, and it shot up from about $89 to $90, literally in minutes. So then the next statement came out. I don't know if you heard, but we ended the war with Iran today, and they've agreed to never have a nuclear weapon. That literally came out just an hour after.
Bullshit. Bullshit is what that is. Pure bullshit.
On the other hand, we then also heard this additional statement as well. Once again, just about 2 hours after the whole oil skyrocketed through the roof thing again. Based on the fact that discussions with the Islamic Republic of Iran have been brought to the highest level of Iranian leadership and approved, I have, as President of the United States of America, canceled the scheduled strikes and bombings against Iran this evening. Discussions and final points have been, in both concept and great detail, approved by all parties involved, including the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Great Plain, Turkey, Pakistan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Egypt, which hasn't been involved at all, and others. The naval blockade will remain in full force and effect until this transaction is finalized. Time and place of the signing will be announced shortly. So, it appears...
Oh, save us, help us, oh my God.
Well, then after that, we were able to hear early reports that indicated that Iran has again engaged a vessel. This was just 4 hours ago, possibly a U.S. surface combatant, while it was transiting the Strait of Hormuz. This, as U.S. Central Command has said, that safe passage for commercial vessels not violating the U.S. blockade is available. We also were able to hear the IRGC did announce that they attacked a commercial vessel in the Strait of Hormuz just a couple of hours before we went live on air, which, according to the U.S., the war is over, so that couldn't have happened. We also were able to get further confirmation of that here as well. Iran did engage a vessel attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz, so it does appear that they did attack a ship. We also got to hear, crazily enough, of some wild explosions going on at Surik and shit. Don't know what was going on with that. That was also at the same time the Iranians were firing at commercial ships and the U.S. warships, so... Huh.
Take your breath. Take your breath. That was actually the Iranians engaging that vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. That's what that was. The explosions at Surik. It was people hearing the engagement in the strait, and that's what they were reporting as explosions in Surik.
Oh, I see. There were also some reports of that from Bandar Abbas as well. And then we were able to hear that Iran denied that there were any explosions happening on Iranian territory, and they could be related to military movements in the maritime area, basically saying what Matthew was saying. So there we got to that news right there on the spot. Then we also saw, the war is over and everything, but then the U.S. went and attacked a vessel in the Gulf of Oman today. This was actually the Guinea-Bissau flagged motor tankle Jalvir, if I could get that right. But here's the
motor tankle.
Man, Lord, Jack, you got that motor tankle. But we see them hitting the engine room on this vessel right here, knocking it on out.
Looks like another hellfire again. It does appear like.
Oh, and
Have they ever found those two crew members? I don't think they ever found those two crew members that were missing on that other ship that got hit with the Hellfire. Because there was two people missing on that one. I'm not never heard an update about that.
I think they said missing as a polite way of saying they were atomized in the engine room from the explosion. Probably, I think that's what they meant by that. Because it's really hard to go missing in an engine room on a ship, for a really long period of time rather than a couple of minutes. So I think they got vaporized. But outside of that, though, we also got to see a picture of this vessel, the Jalvier, from nearby. Take a look at that. There it is on fire from the engine room. So that's the current U.S. foreign policy position as of right now. The Iranians, on the other hand, have made a lot of statements in Tehran today about this deal, and they made the following claims. Tonight's attack has been canceled. The head of the U.S. terrorist government claimed that the negotiations have progressed and said that tonight's U.S. attack will be canceled. The president has announced 38 times in the past 2 months that an agreement is imminent. That's you would think that's Iranian propaganda. We actually went and checked some other sources around, and yeah, the count is actually 38. They actually didn't get that one wrong. Within 3 days, he had imagined sending Pence to Pakistan 4 times.
Pence, bro, what are they talking about? That was the vice president from years ago.
Someone woke up in Iran. Pence is a bastard. It's Vance. Oh, what
the hell? Well, man, they said they literally said sending Pence. Who put this out? Tasnim News?
Yeah, Tasnim did.
Jeez, man, they're out of their mind. Pence hadn't been in the whole government in years. He hadn't been around for ages.
Bro, they got that Internet Explorer way of writing a news article. Man, it's from 6 years ago. It's damn. It's that should have said Vance, but it says Pence. Well, I mean, they're kind of close when you think about it, though. Especially if you're not incredibly familiar with the English language, they both end with NCE. So maybe that's why they put Pence. I don't know.
Or they don't have internet to pull up who the hell the vice president is right now. They don't know who his name is. That's crazy work, by the way. Sending Pence. Also, by the way, it's Pence, the vice president wasn't even sent to Pakistan 4 times. The people that's been going there, I think, I think it might be the U.S. envoy, I think, or something like that. They haven't sent the vice president.
Yeah, they haven't. I think they sent him once, but that was the only time. Also, I see a lot of people saying the Tasnim News is such bullshit. It is. I agree with y'all. But the thing about it is, though, is that it's an IRGC affiliated news outlet in Iran, and that's why we take their statements and read them on air, because they're basically the mouthpiece in media form of the IRGC. So that's why we read them. I know generally a lot of their statements are full of crap, but it's important to read them because it's actually showing in the broader strokes what the Iranian position is right now on the situation. Until the possible understanding is announced by Iran, any news from the president in this regard should be considered as part of his previous messages. We then also heard some further elaboration as well, that the Iranian state media outlet Fars, which is also IRGC affiliated, says that the U.S. through Qatari mediation dropped the president's proposed changes to the original Iran-offered peace deal. So the Iranians completely dropped anything that we were asking for and just said, take our deal or we're going to walk. That's what they said today, at least according to Fars. We then also heard at the end of the day, this was the most recent statement, that the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said much of the text had already been finalized, but the U.S. shifted its position, adding that Tehran has not reached a final conclusion on any agreement and reports of a deal remain entirely speculative. Now, what are people thinking about this? Matthew, take it away.
Okay, so the U.S. canceled their scheduled strikes. Because remember, yesterday when we were on the breaking war news stream that we covered early yesterday evening, the U.S. president was making statements that he was going to blow the shit out of Iran if they didn't sign the deal. And there was all kinds of statements about they're going to definitely hit Iran tonight, which was when we're running the stream right now. So now we're hearing that the U.S. canceled all those strikes because Iran allegedly approved a deal, but the Iranians are saying they never signed a deal, and they're saying that they haven't agreed to anything, despite the U.S. announcing that there's a deal apparently that just got approved. So kind of a weird thing that if a country is, signing a deal for them to deny that they've signed a deal, a little bit strange with that. So what are your thoughts? 61% said a deal will never happen, ever. 27% said the U.S. is stalling for some reason, and 7% said a deal is actually really close. And a deal is never going to happen, folks. I think you'd have to be blind at this point not to see that. A deal is not possible because the U.S. and Iran are so far apart on so many important issues that unless the U.S. simply says we surrender, then a deal is not possible. So I will say this. If the Iranians are telling the truth, and I really don't put much stock in what they say because they're a terrorist regime, but if they're telling the truth and the U.S. is making concessions about a deal to simply sign one and get it done, that means the U.S. is on the verge of surrendering. That's what that means, which would be the most awful foreign policy decision we could make. It's going to piss off all of our allies in the region, including the Gulf states, Israel, etc. And not only that, it's going to piss off any sensible-minded American, too, that we got into a war just to surrender to a country that is is a terrorist regime. So there's no way forward except for simply the U.S. can keep stalling until they find the balls to deal with it, or they can simply finish the job like they said they were going to do last night. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I had to be with 61%. A deal's never going to happen, I don't think. If a deal is about to happen with Iran, then there is really a Nigerian prince that has $400 million and I'm related to him. I'm about to get an inheritance. Like, that's the only way that a deal is ever going to happen is if scams are real. And this is just nowhere close to happening. It's unbelievable. Like, and it's this is going to go on for another month or two, like for sure, where a deal's around the corner every day. Tomorrow, the president's going to wake up. He might even be making a post right now, or he's going to claim that the Iranians are bastards. We're going to have to bomb them to teach them a lesson or something. That's coming around again tomorrow. Literally the bombings that happened yesterday happened right after the day before that on Monday, where he said, we've negotiated the Israelis out of striking Iran. A deal is literally just hours away right now. No joke. Like, he literally said that on Monday. And then on Tuesday, we bombed them. And now today, a deal is once again hours away from being signed. And in fact, the war is even over. Like, the whole war ended, according to the president today.
Yeah, it's also, by the way, they threatened this morning to invade and take Karg Island and start stealing the Iranians' oil. So they threatened that this morning. And then literally, what was it, like a handful of hours later, like 3 or 4 hours later, or maybe even less than that, they said, oh, the war's over. It's like, wow, how do we go from invading Karg Island to also airstriking Iran to now all of a sudden a couple hours later, everything's been resolved. Every single one of these like monumental, like Mount Everest-sized issues have been suddenly resolved after just a couple of hours after threatening to invade and take Karg Island. It's like, that isn't making logical sense on its face. It's not even a good lie. It's not even good. Like, you'd have to be insane to look at the sequence of events and say, oh, that makes sense. He must be telling the truth. You'd have to be insane.
Honestly, it'd have to be nuts. But moving us on into the United Arab Emirates, we also got to see an F-35 declared an emergency today. We also saw that around Bahrain, we were able to get finally some impact reports. It appears that one missile landed in the area of Hamad City in Manama and caused some damage to some residential buildings and commercial buildings. And we also saw smoke rising from near to an AR-327 long-range radar in Bahrain as well, although it appears that the radome was not directly hit. It seems that something else on the facility was hit and was on fire as a result of the attack. We also were able to see additionally that near to Karaj, there was some archival clips that came out today of yesterday's attacks near to Karaj, which we saw right here. Oh my God!
This is what the U.S. should have been doing to Iran literally right now.
Yeah, we should be. But they just won't. I don't know why, man. Yeah, give that slide.
I was just warming up. I was just warming up to it though last night because I even gave credit last night. I said this is what the U.S. should be doing and dealing with this terrorist regime properly by dealing with them with a pretty steady hand. But then today they chicken out. I said that yesterday too. I said unless they chicken out or something tomorrow, which is today, then it seems like it's on a good step forward. But it doesn't look like they took the extra step.
Man, it doesn't look like they ever will. It doesn't look like they ever will. Honestly, folks, right now, for foreign policy, if you watch the executive branch and you just set your bar of expectations down to expecting absolute failure on everything, you won't ever be sorely disappointed because that's what you're getting 90% of the time these days on any given day. But we also got to see some of the air defenses around the Muwafaq Air Base. This is also archival footage. This didn't happen today. This happened yesterday, but the footage came out today from a new angle. There goes another Patriot. Tom Summer said, what happened with the Tehran water crisis? It's still going on in the background. It's just that we don't get any information reliably to report on it any longer. But it's still a major crisis within the region. Meanwhile, we're already dealing with arsenic clouds here in Salt Lake. We had one yesterday, actually.
It won't hurt you. Just don't mess with it.
Man, meanwhile, the rats out there are going, man, oh, God!
Man. I don't care if the arsenic blows in my face every single day from that dry lake bed of the Salt Lake thing. I still won't be dumb enough to believe that a deal's close.
Oh man, I can't wait to see what they mean about saving the Great Salt Lake, considering how foreign policy is going. The president said they're going to save the Great Salt Lake. I wonder how that's going to go. They're probably just going to drain the thing at this point. But moving this on out of the Middle East, that's everything that we had out of the region. Thank God we didn't have to cover that for like 40 minutes. So we're going to immediately move on out of this. I don't even want to stay here for any longer than we have to. So moving us on and up into the area of Ukraine to continue to cover the news from up here, we still have some very interesting developments that came out of Ukraine today. It's time for us to get into those front lines, speaking of which. In our location unknown news today, we got to see these Russians getting schwacked by an unmanned ground vehicle that was mounted with a machine gun. We see the Ukrainians loaded, and the battle bot is on its way.
Well, that's all the news we have for you tonight, y'all. I hope y'all enjoyed the show. Please hit that bell button to get notified. I'm going to take care of my dog. About to start giving her pain medicine and stuff for her jaw. But I hope y'all have a wonderful, God bless night. Please, excuse me, sorry I burped. But anyways, please hit that bell button to get notified, and make sure you drop a follow and subscribe so you can get up-to-date news every day. Well, 24/7. We try to keep y'all breaking news. If breaking news comes out, we try to get y'all breaking news. We also have live call-in, so y'all can actually call and actually talk to talk to me or talk to the person that would be answering the phone. So feel free to call in and get your voice heard when we're live. Our phone lines are off whenever we are off air. So just be aware that if we don't answer the